Welcome to the Atlantic Perspectives podcast.
Welcome to the first episode of the podcast The White House in Europe with Maxime Lobé. And to begin, let's go back to the origins. The goal is to understand how the United States sees Europe. The alliance between these two continents may seem obvious since the Second World War, but it has not always been the case. And since the first election of Donald Trump in 2016, this alliance has been tested, challenged, shaken. And this is not the first time that has happened. By the way, when you hear the word transatlantic relationship, do you think of something strong and stable or something fragile and uncertain? Episode after episode, we will look at how American presidents and their administration have handled relations with Europe. This first season, we look at the first 5 American presidents, who belong to the group known as the Founding Fathers. But today, for this first episode, we go back before George Washington, before there was even a president, to understand how the United States were born. Let's add a bit of context. From the first European navigators to George Washington, the first American president, how were the US created? The story of the United States begins long before independence. It begins with the arrival of Europeans on the continent. We all remember the date 1492, when Christopher Columbus thinks he has reached Asia. But he is not the first European sailor to land on American shores. Several European expeditions had already crossed the Atlantic. In the 16th century, things become serious. Europe explores, conquers, settles. The Spanish explored the south, the area that would now go from Florida to California, and they create some permanent colonies there. The French go further north, along the St. Lawrence and Mississippi rivers, and create the vast New France, which includes Louisiana, Newfoundland, Acadia, and Canada. As a small detail, Louisiana is named in honor of the Sun King, Louis XIV, and at that time, Louisiana is much bigger than the current US state. As for the Dutch, they begin to explore North America at the start of the 17th century, sailing up the Hudson River. They set up trading posts in the region called New Netherland, along the coast of what are now Pennsylvania, New York, Connecticut, and Massachusetts. On Manhattan Island, they found New Amsterdam, where Dutch, Walloon, Flemish, and French live. The British are also present on the continent from the early 17th century. They expand their control over the northeast and take New Amsterdam, which becomes New York in 1664. English replaces Dutch. But the Dutch economic and social influence remains, and the diversity of the population shows that immigration is a long-lasting feature of the North American colonies. From the beginning, it is all of Europe that shapes America. Navigators, missionaries, merchants, but also rivalries between crowns. But these European ambitions take place on land that is already inhabited. Indigenous nations with many different cultures, languages, and alliances live on the continent. Some build commercial or military relationships with the colonial powers, the Iroquois with the British, the Hurons with the French, while others resist any intrusion. Their role is essential in the history of North America. But it stays on the background here because we focus mainly on the dialogue between Europe and the future American state. In the 17th century, British colonization grows. 13 colonies prosper along the Atlantic coast, from Massachusetts to Georgia. Some live from trade and fishing, others from large plantations where slavery develops. These colonies are very different from one another, but little by little, they share a common feeling of identity. They elect representatives, debate taxes, and manage local affairs, a first taste of democracy, far from royal control. In Europe, rivalry between colonial powers reaches its peak with the 7 Years' War, from 1756 to 1763. In North America, this war directly opposes France and Great Britain. British victory marks a turning point. France loses Canada and most of its possessions, and Great Britain becomes the leading colonial power on the continent. This conflict can be seen as the first global war, with many countries involved. On one side, Great Britain, Prussia, some states of the Holy Roman Empire, Ireland, Portugal, and the Iroquois. On the other side, France, Austria, Russia, Sweden, Spain, and another German state. In the end, in the colonies, Britain takes the advantage over France in several regions. And in 1763, Britain and France, together with Spain, signed the Treaty of Paris. Louis XV, King of France, gives up most French territories in North America in order to keep French trading posts in India. New France becomes a British possession, except for Louisiana, which had already been ceded to Spain in 1762. British victory has a cost. London is heavily in debt. It imposes new taxes on the colonies. The colonists are not happy at all. They insist on a principle: a territory without representation cannot be taxed. This is the famous no taxation without representation. On top of these taxes, the British want more control over their American colonies. For example, the colonies are required to buy only British products. This creates strong economic dependence. We could even call it economic vassalization. If foreign ships want to trade with the colonies, they must first stop in a British port and pay custom duties. Moreover, King George III puts in place a policy to protect tribal lands to stop westward expansion of settlement. The colonists see these measures as unfair and arbitrary. They feel a growing resentment. In 1774, the Boston Tea Party takes place, a spark that sets everything on fire. Tea is the most taxed product by the British. It becomes the symbol of the conflict between the mother country and the colonies. At its peak, the tea crisis leads to the Boston Events, where more than 40 tons of tea are thrown into the water. In reaction, the British government imposes the Coercive Acts. These are laws that punish the colony of Massachusetts. The colonial government is dissolved, the port is closed. Alongside the rejection of the mother country, there is another force at work: the desire for happiness and personal success, fed by the opportunities of this huge North American territory. All this, in a climate of tension, leads to the War of Independence. In 1775, the first clashes break out. We talk about the Battle of Lexington and Concord, near Boston. Massachusetts is already seen as the most rebellious, the most hostile colony. The British Army decides to crush the colonial resistance by attacking the town of Concord. But instead of stopping the rising revolution, this attack triggers the war between the colonies and Great Britain. The War of Independence pushes George Washington to the head of the Continental Army, the Army of the 13 Colonies. But we also need to talk about Thomas Paine. At the beginning of 1776, he calls on America to break with Great Britain and to write a republican constitution. And on the 4th of July, 1776, the Continental Congress, representing the 13 colonies, adopts the Declaration of Independence. The United States of America are born. Before there is a president, before there is a constitution, America is already speaking to Europe. From the Declaration of Independence to the election of George Washington, it is important to look at a few key people who embody American diplomacy in Europe. Their goal? Make sure the young country is recognized by the European powers. To win the War of Independence, Americans need allies. They need money, equipment, and soldiers. And you? If you had to name one person, who would you associate with this first American diplomacy? In 1776, in Paris, an old man with round glasses becomes a legend: Benjamin Franklin, the scientist, the philosopher of the Enlightenment, the inventor. He is considered a major figure of the Enlightenment in the US. He is both nearsighted and farsighted, and he invents bifocal glasses. He also invents the lightning rod. But let's leave these details and go back to Paris. In the salons of Versailles, people look at him as a prophet from the New World. He negotiates the support of the King of France for the American cause. America does not ask for war, only for the right to govern itself. In 1778, thanks to him, France becomes the first ally of the US. An alliance signed at Versailles. The old world reaches out to the new. On the French side, several figures make this alliance decisive. First, the Comte of Vergennes, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Louis XVI. He organizes French support and signs the 1778 treaties with Franklin. Then the famous Marquis de Lafayette. Barely 19, he crosses the Atlantic to fight at Washington's side and then defend the American cause at Versailles. Without them, the alliance would not become victory. Even if the alliance with France is crucial, we must not forget the role of John Adams, future president. He is first sent as ambassador to the Netherlands, where he secures recognition of the US. In 1785, he is then sent to England, in London. John Adams, formerly revolutionary, becomes the ambassador of reconciliation. The British king, still wounded by defeat, probably realizes, with some surprise, that the former rebel colonies now send diplomats. John Adams has a complex mission: to build diplomatic relations with the former colonial power. The relationship must be normalized after the War of Independence. But let's go back to France, because in 1785, a young ambassador arrives in Paris, Thomas Jefferson, principal author of the Declaration of Independence, Franklin's successor, and future American president. He's also a friend of France, also a philosopher, also an admirer of the Enlightenment. He spends time with Lafayette, reads Montesquieu, and dreams of a world ruled by reason and liberty. Every man has two countries, his own and France. He watches France in motion, feels the revolution coming. For him, it is a mirror of America, a reflection of a universal ideal. Between 1776 and 1789, the US have no president, no fixed capital, no regular army, but they already have a voice. Franklin and then Jefferson in Versailles, Adams in London, and not only them. Alongside these rock stars, other men cross the ocean with the same message of freedom. Less famous, but just as determined. They defend the American cause behind the scenes in Europe. There is one of them that I really want to mention. Let's go back a little bit in time. In 1779, in Madrid, a lawyer named John Jay tries to obtain what Franklin has already secured in Paris: recognition of a new country and financial help. John Jay, former president of the Continental Congress, tries to convince the Spanish monarchy to support the young republic. But Spain stays cautious. King Charles III fears that if he recognizes the US, this might inspire independence movements in his own colonies. In the end, Spain does fight Britain, but not as an ally of the Americans. It sides with the French under the Bourbon family compact. Back to John Jay. His persistence makes him one of the architects of peace. He soon joins Franklin and Adams in Paris to negotiate the end of the war. In 1783, his signature appears at the bottom of the Treaty of Paris. American independence is now officially recognized by Britain. John Jay becomes, without the title, the first true US Secretary of State. I will end this part by saying that these men share a destiny built around a new idea. Before any president takes the oath, they make heard the voice of a nation already driven by an ideal: political freedom, the sovereignty of the people, and the dignity of the individual. So, in 1783, the Treaty of Paris formally ends the War of Independence. It also confirms recognition of the US as an independent nation. In 1787, at the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, the Constitution of the United States is written. It is signed by the delegates from the different states of the Union, and in June 1788, it is ratified and it officially comes into force in March 1789. And in April of the same year, George Washington, hero of the War of Independence, is sworn in as the first president of the United States of America. In this episode, we have gone back over the origins of the US, from the first European explorations to the years after the War of Independence. We have seen how rival empires shaped the continent and how colonial tensions led to the revolution. We have also looked at the key diplomatic efforts of Franklin, Adams, Jefferson and Jay in Europe. Efforts that allowed the young republic to be recognized on the international stage and that led to the election of George Washington. In the next episode, we will talk about the presidency of George Washington, the very first president of the US. A presidency where everything has to be built: institutions, diplomacy, and the country's place in the world. It is the moment when America truly becomes a nation. This was the White House in Europe with Maxime Lobé. Thank you for listening today. You can find all the content from Atlantic Perspectives on our website, and you can follow Atlantic Perspectives on social media, as well as on the platform where you are listening to this podcast. Music licensed via Epidemic Sound.